Oh yeah. Hey yo, it's the Russo Show. Hey yo, it's the Russo Show.
Hello everyone and welcome to Pizza Film School. This season, we're exploring the world of AGBO's essential creative partners, how these talented individuals work their magic behind the scenes, contributing their expertise to the variety of components involved in creating a film. Today, we have a special treat for our listeners. We're joined by the extraordinary Sarah Haley Finn. Not only has Sarah cast the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, but she's also the casting genius behind Martin McDonagh's 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, Favreau's The Mandalorian, sports films like Miracle and Coach Carter, iconic indies such as 200 Cigarettes, to action films, dramas, and comedies. She's cast over 100 films and has received 2 Emmy nominations for her work on WandaVision and The Mandalorian. Today, we're going to dive into her expansive career, specifically looking at examples in films that we worked on together with her: Mosul, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and Captain America: Winter Soldier, Captain America: Civil War, and Avengers: Endgame. All right, so Sarah, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to Pizza Film School.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Today we are eating Cosa Buona, which is a pizza place in Echo Park. I shouldn't call it a pizza place. It's actually an amazing restaurant. It's one of my favorite places in all of LA. And we have pepperoni in the Neapolitan and Sicilian. And then my favorite, they call the Estivo, which is basically just has some marinara, roasted tomatoes, arugula, red pepper, Calabrian chilies, very nice. And we're drinking Aperol Spritzes today. So, cheers.
Cheers.
Alcohol is a new introduction to Pizza Film School. It started with Alan Silvestri, right?
Yeah,
That was
Alan
our
kicked
first-
it off because legitimately Alan is a winemaker. I don't know if you knew that about
didn't.
Alan Silvestri.
He makes incredible wines.
Okay.
So
Okay.
part of like how we like to kick things off is we think of you as like a superhero in the filmmaking universe. And so we like to start off with like all good superhero yarns, like with your origin story.
Really, I came into casting a bit accidentally. I was doing theater, and I studied acting when I was younger. I went to New York City after I graduated and started doing off-Broadway theater. And I was working at a theater company called Ensemble Studio Theater in Manhattan, which really encourages a multidisciplinary approach. So if you want to act, then you have to take a turn as stage manager. If you want to write, then you're going to run the lighting board or something. And it was actually through the theater that I got in touch and became friendly with a theater director who was also a casting director named Risa Brayman Garcia. And a few years later, I was out in Los Angeles and we were continuing the theater projects. And I was always running off to do a day job to make money, to pay my rent. And she said, why don't you just cast this project with me? And I knew about casting because I had, done some acting when I was younger, but I never had gone through the whole experience. So I took that first job and kind of didn't look up for another 3 years.
Wow.
I just got so immersed with it. It was so exciting to me. And I realized that it was a little bit of different skills that I had been acquiring anyway. I had studied acting. I was starting to assistant direct for theater. And I was producing playwrights and running a theater company. I had run my college theater at Yale. We had a black box. And I kind of took those skills and went to New York City and started working with playwrights and started producing plays as well as acting and doing a little directing. So when I came to casting, it was actually all of those things every single day. I was working with actors and trying to understand what their training was, what their background was, what the best vocabulary would be to help them and communicate with them. And then the producing part comes in with casting because you're trying to work on a schedule, you're trying to work on a budget, you're interfacing with all of the other departments. So really through theater, I ended up finding this love and finding my way into casting, and I never looked back.
Do you remember the first time you became interested in drama or acting at a younger age?
From a really young age. I remember a play that I wrote with like 2 skunks and a cat in 2nd grade. So I think it was in me from a very young age. And then I kept doing it through high school. I always loved working with kids, and that's actually how I got my first job as a casting director, was doing a huge search for a child for Polly, A Parrot's Tale, and found Hallie Eisenberg through that process. And actually her big brother Jesse had taken her to the audition. She was about 4, I think, at the time. So I loved working with kids, and in high school I was, Maria in The Sound of Music. This is all very embarrassing stuff to tell you, but I loved storytelling from a really young age. And I think my parents really encouraged it because they also loved theater and they loved film.
Would you describe what the casting director job is?
The casting director, simply put, is responsible for finding an actor for every speaking role in a film or television project or a play. But really, it involves auditioning actors, reading actors, talking to agents and managers, finding out who they're representing, and sometimes going out to do a bigger search beyond that, because not all actors are represented, as we know, and not all communities are well represented on screen. And that's changing, but sometimes it takes a lot of extra work to go out and find people. So when I get a script, the first thing I'll want to know is, what are you thinking about? What do you want for these characters? And get as much information. Then we'll take that information, read the script, reread it, and we'll put out something called a breakdown, which is our way of communicating with the industry. We'll write out a description of the roles and release that to all the agents and managers that work in the talent industry, so that then we can further the conversation by talking to them about their talent, who they represent, who they would like to put forth for these roles. And we'll get submissions from every agency and every manager, thousands of submissions. So the first thing we do is kind of cull down all those submissions, and we identify, okay, here's 200 people we think are really right for the part. And then the next phase will be to audition them. So say there's 2,000 submissions for one role, we cut it down to 200, we bring you 20.
Right.
And even that is a lot of your time.
Yes, yeah, and actors, you heard that correctly. 2,000 submissions, 20 go to us. Don't be too discouraged, but also consider that.
Yes.
Yes.
And the longer that we're doing this, the more we get to know the talent base and the actors, the more we get to know each other. And sometimes it's an idea that we'll have, and instead of having a long audition process, it's an offer.
Right.
But often it starts with that very first moment where we're releasing the breakdown and starting to see talent. And that's always an exciting time. It's kind of like the starting bell. We're off and running and we're involved in the search. That's almost the day-to-day, the nuts and bolts. Then you're dealing with also your acquired knowledge. And then there's really the intangibles about our job that are quite hard to articulate even, and I think even within our industry are not well understood, because there is a lot of secrecy, and I think that's to protect the process, right? It's to protect the actors who are putting themselves on the line and auditioning for something that might be a little out of their comfort zone. We're not going to publicly disclose how we get to those choices, because again, it's kind of a vulnerable process where everyone's learning. Actually, I think the character really does need to be stronger in that way. And let's lean into that quality that we're seeing in some of the readings.
Right.
So it is a bit of a mysterious process, and it's amazing and great to have the opportunity to shed some light on it, because I think that there's an increased interest in casting right now. I think now there's a BAFTA award for casting and more appreciation of work that casting
You
directors
look at that
do.
ensemble award at SAG is really
Yeah.
a precursor for Best Picture nominees. So
Yeah.
And winners. Would you tell me a little bit about what constitutes a threshold for an offer actor versus a submission or an audition?
Usually it's their stature in the industry. So, for example, Captain America Winter Soldier, and that was our first project together,
Right.
which was so fun. And you referenced the 70s. This is the tone. We want it to be textured and a little grittier and have that political undercurrent. And we were talking about different actors that could play Pierce. We knew because of his age and his stature in the film, we were going to want a weighty actor. So I think this is going to be an actor in his 60s or 70s. And so in that case,
right.
well established, they're going to go head to head with Sam Jackson. They're going to have a lot of import in the film and a lot of weight. So we knew we were going for established. So at that point, it's more like, let's talk about a list of actors that you love. And of course, Redford having all the weight that he carries and the power as a performer and the skill that he has and the talent, but also being able to have that referential undertone of 3 Days of the Condor, and all of those subtle things that maybe audiences pick up and maybe they don't was really fun. I think that was a fun way to build those layers into the casting.
Yeah, and I think it's such a fascinating thing that you point out there, in terms of what that character needed to be and the stature, because this is a character who needs to fool Nick Fury and Sam Jackson and Captain America, these very credible characters. So it's like, who can actually show up and sort of command that kind of belief?
I would argue it's probably, to me, the most surprising piece of casting we've ever been involved in, because I didn't think there was a chance in hell that he would say yes.
Yeah,
and, the thematic continuity of his work in the 70s and then this movie being an homage to that work, getting him added an intertextual layer to the movie. Do you remember, how did that process begin? Who did we talk to in his life? How did we get to Redford? Do you remember this?
Because of his stature, because he's Robert Redford, that was a very different process from the normal way that we're casting these roles. It was a bit of a courtship. And I think it reminded me a bit of when we first thought of Jeff Bridges for the first Iron Man. These were high-level actors that
don't need to
wanted
work.
To go after. Often, the scripts with Marvel movies are not shared, so
makes it even more difficult.
That can be a much bigger challenge that we're facing. So I would say hats off to you and ask you, because I think you had a lot to do with really helping him feel comfortable.
The first meeting that you arranged for us with Robert Redford was, we went over to his office.
Well, this is the best meeting we've ever had.
Yeah, this is, I can't even believe it's
not even close.
I'm not making this up. We go over to his office. He has a kitchen in his office.
Wow.
And we come in and meet him, which was like, borderline overwhelming moment. And then we learned that we're going to have lunch with him in the office. Not only were we going to have lunch with him, but he has cooked the lunch.
Okay.
So it was very personal.
Finishing it while we were chatting with him. And then he served us lunch and sat down and we ate lunch and talked together. Talked about the movie, talked about the tone of the movie.
Wow.
He admitted that he had only taken the meeting for his grandkids.
That's right, that's true.
But it ended up being a fantastic conversation. We had an amazing relationship with him over the course of the movie. And I've shown my kids this thing. And my third child, Ava, who coincidentally is also an actress, was on set that day that Robert was working. And it was a proud moment for me because she went over to craft services and she ran back to me and she goes, "Did you get the guy from The Sting for this movie?"
That's amazing.
The guy from The Sting in this movie? And I thought, oh, that's great. You know who Robert Redford is. But from a process standpoint, really unique, right? On the other end of the spectrum from, say, other jobs that we've done together, like Mosul, where we're looking for completely new casting, right? Like talk about that for a second. Let's talk about Mosul. Mosul's a film we made, an Arabic language film. It needed actors who spoke a certain Iraqi dialect.
Yep.
And so it was really specific, the casting on that.
It couldn't be the more opposite end of the spectrum, right? Than Robert Redford casting.
Yeah.
Right?
So talk a little bit about how you find a cast for a film like Mosul.
Yeah. I knew going in that this was going to be a challenge. When you first talked to me about this, and it was an Arabic language film, I thought, okay, this I have not done before. I've never cast a film in another language. And there weren't a lot of established actors, right?
Yeah.
That we were going to look for. We didn't need a big name. In fact, a big name might have distracted from the story that we were going to tell.
Yeah, and part of the challenge we were facing also on Mosul was, we were trying to tell an Iraqi story.
Yeah.
We were trying to take the resources of Hollywood and say, how do we sort of focus attention on this really important story as outsiders, but necessarily as outsiders, because everybody had to flee and scatter. There was no way for us to access the source any longer.
Yep.
Which is why I think your job on that movie, I don't even understand how you approached it.
Well, I studied history and theater at college as an undergraduate, and I often think of casting as a big research project, and I'm so glad that I had some of that background, because the first thing we did was research. We just researched as much as we could about what was the film community in Iraq before the war, who was working, who were the artists, who were the directors and filmmakers, who could we call to get references. Actors are such a friendly and collaborative tribe that one actor would refer another actor. Oh, you've got to look up this person. And then we had to look and see where many of these Iraqi actors had gone. Because they were in Europe, they were in Michigan. There was a huge population in Michigan, then we ended up enlisting a local casting director there. We had casting directors in Jordan and in different places in the Middle East that were helping. We did put out a breakdown. I don't think we got a lot of submissions, so we really had to go through whatever approaches we could, social media, getting the word out, putting out flyers to find people. And I'm sure you guys know that we found Suhail, who was a celebrated actor in Iraq, working in Arizona.
And
Yeah, it's
one of the
remarkable.
great Iraqi actors who sort of given up on the dream.
I mean, the fact that you were able to, through your ingenuity and tenacity, find him there is so remarkable.
It was so exciting, and to see his work and to know that he was going to get this lead role, because he had so much to bring to it, so much strength and so much pathos and so much understanding. And I think that's really what we were going for, is knowing that we were doing this from the outside, but looking for people who could bring the authenticity to the film, because without that, there was no reason to tell the story. We felt like we had to do that.
And I feel like, Suhail may be the most extreme example in terms of the unlikely places that you were able to find the people in that cast, but there were other unlikely places as well.
Yeah, there was one of the actors we cast out of Michigan was working in a dentist office. They didn't have a lot of ability to transition into the acting market here or find agents. And frankly, a lot of the roles that actors had been faced with coming from a Middle Eastern or Arabic background was playing terrorists, playing roles that maybe they didn't want to play, and now we were casting heroes.
This movie was the first movie that AGBO as a company made. And I'm so proud that we were all able to work together on it and sort of bring this unlikely story in an unlikely way to audiences. Adam Besa, like how, just to use him as an example, who's one of the leads of the film.
Was also in Extraction and Extraction 2.
Yeah, who we continued working with
Yeah.
after Mosul as well. How did you initially respond to him and feel like he was right for this role? Like, what's that process like for you as you discover an actor?
He wasn't cast right away. We kept going through the process. He was seen out of London, but we kept with it, and I think he did multiple callbacks. I think sometimes people think that in casting you just arrive at the perfect person or it just magically appears. It's not always that way. Sometimes it really takes numerous auditions and some back and forth, and you know what, maybe as an actor we'd like you to go think about this and come back in a couple days, work on that. And I'm not saying that he wasn't great from the beginning, but he had never played a character like that before. And we knew the extremes that character was going to have to go through. So I think he actually did several auditions before we had a tape that we brought to you to show you. And another subtlety in all this is accent. Because we wanted it to feel authentic, well, when actors are living in different places, their accents start to change, or they have other influences. When I'm working on a project, if they're speaking Arabic, we'll have a reader with us who's an Arabic speaker. And we'll try to discern as best we can the difference between native speakers and non-native speakers, so that at least we can advise you guys, so when there's a dialect coach on set, they'll know what they're working with so that we get the sound.
Let me talk about, I'm going to switch the conversation to what I think is probably the largest scale, has to be, job for a casting director in the history of movies, right? Which is casting the entire Marvel universe. I don't even know what year we're on now. When did it start? 2008?
2008, Iron Man came out. I think I started in 2006.
Talk about having an impact, not only on pop culture, not only on movies, but on the entire lives and careers of dozens of actors. Robert being the prime example, right? Such a redemptive story, because Robert was a gamble at that time, couldn't get insured. Hemsworth was a discovery. Evans had one or two roles, but nothing.
And with
Fantastic
Evans,
Four,
that was almost a negative.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Right, because
we had to work against. There was an unspoken rule that we weren't going to cast somebody again if they had already been in a Marvel or a superhero story.
Because it wasn't until baggage you wanted to
we thought, well, no, we can't do that. It wasn't until later on in the process for casting Captain America that I, at a table, stuck my neck out and said, why can't we talk about him?
Right.
Because he
felt like
he was so right. He was hiding in plain sight.
Right.
And
well, it's
got
interesting
close.
you say that, because Captain America is unique, I think, in
Yes.
Evans' canon.
Yeah.
He usually plays like funny, smarmier,
Yeah.
right, characters, and Cap is so understated.
Yes.
Why did you think he was right for that role?
With a lot of these characters, we're looking for an actor who kind of effortlessly embodies the core essential qualities.
Even though he had played these
Yeah.
snarky characters, you felt that he himself, Evans, possessed
Yes.
the qualities for the character.
There's a lot of different criteria, okay? One is the physicality. We knew we needed somebody pretty tall, pretty fit, and we were gonna cast an American. There have been a lot of Brits playing superheroes, but in this case, he was Captain America. We were only gonna look at Americans. So I think the talent and the skill is a given. We're looking for the ability to play a range of emotions, but then I think the third thing that you are looking for are those innate qualities. Do we believe that this person has a moral center? Do we believe that this person has humility? Do we connect with this person? Is that person on screen accessible? Do we feel for them as an audience? And I think an actor can work on creating a biography for a character and bringing a character to a life. But then there are these other intangibles that I think as an audience, as a filmmaking team, you're perceiving, you're intuiting.
And did he do multiple screen tests? How did that process play out?
That process was really different because, as I said, it wasn't an early impulse to cast him.
Right.
And I understand that there was a reluctance on his part to take a role after seeing what happened with Iron Man that was going to give him a level of celebrity that he had to wrap his head around, which of course made us want him even more because Captain America's humble. Yeah.
Well, yeah, many actors, thrive on their ability to be chameleons, and when you sort of all of a sudden are bringing along with your identity something that exists outside of that. You
Yeah.
know?
You have to weigh that against the compelling part is then you can go get projects made that normally wouldn't have gotten made if
Right.
you had not had that level of celebrity. There are actors who are larger than life. They have a level of charisma that like walk in any room, take over the room. And then there are actors who are very internal, and this is an opportunity for them to express themselves in a way that they normally wouldn't. Chris is more of that second category.
There are performers, there are celebrities, and there are really actors who just love the process of transforming into something and don't love the social
that's a
media,
great-
don't love the other aspects of it.
I think about this a lot. I want to ask you this question.
Yeah.
The difference between a movie star and a trained actor. There are stars that play themselves over and over again. It's attractive because they're very engaging versus a trained actor who's also a star, but pushes into different directions, more of a chameleon. Like, are you open to challenging that movie star to try to push them somewhere that they traditionally haven't gone? And do audiences want to see that, do you think?
That's a great question, and I think it varies film to film. In some films, it can work to great effect, and in other circumstances, it could be really distracting and just pull you out of the story. And it's hard for actors to navigate now in this time of social media when you're expected to have Twitter followers and Instagram followers. It's almost like you're building this other persona that makes it harder for you to disappear into a character.
I want to ask a strangely specific question, but I think it's like in an area that's kind of sensitive and awkward. And it made me think when you were talking about Chris Evans, again, Captain America was sort of this idealized version of like what a human being can be physically. And so when you have those kind of very specific requirements in a role, and that have to do with parts of actors' bodies that aren't normally exposed during a normal day, how do you approach that kind of personal, physical elements that may be relevant to a role?
In a lot of the Marvel movies, there's a training process. So really the question is, whatever kind of shape you are in currently, are you willing to do the work? But then there are also just givens. I think when we were casting for Thor on the breakdown, it said over 6 feet, please. We just knew that that was an important part of this Asgardian.
That's why my audition got thrown out. Is that what
Sorry.
it was? Because I thought I nailed it.
That should have been on the breakdown.
Yeah. So there are times when we're really specific, and then there's other times where it's very open, right? When things are prescribed from the comic books or in the script. That's often a conversation we'll have really early on.
There's the ideas that you conceive of in a room in isolation. And then when you get out into the world and you start looking, the energy and the ideas that can come back at you are usually a hell of a lot more compelling than what you dreamt up in a room. Donald Glover is an example. On Community, it was originally written for a white actor, but it felt very pedestrian to Anthony and I. We'd seen it before, and we'd seen Glover years earlier on
He
some
wasn't
sketch
your
comedy.
prototypical jock.
Right, and within 30 seconds, we knew he was going to make this a hell of a lot more exciting than what it was on the page. Will Arnett on Arrested Development. Because originally, we were looking at like 40-plus actors. It was a little bit of a creepier character. It was sort of the weird uncle.
Right.
Lived in the attic, you know. And it
Awkward,
just
yeah.
was skewing too odd.
Right.
And it wasn't bringing the ensemble to life. Let's just get off this concept.
Right.
Who else could this be? What if he's more of a
Will
slick
came in with
personality?
this
What if
bravado
we were more
and sort
the-
of unaccountable confidence, you know.
Right.
and
who he
activated
was.
the entire ensemble. We went, there it is. Like we found that piece of talent that is
Right.
activating all the other talent in a way. So we inherited Evans.
Yep.
And we inherited Scarlett and Sam, right? So when we did Winter Soldier, we were very fortunate to inherit some incredible actors from you. But when we went to do Civil War,
Yeah.
there were two new roles that were in that.
Right.
Spider-Man and Black Panther.
Yep.
I just want to talk for a minute about both Tom and Chadwick.
Yep.
Tom was very different than Chadwick,
Completely different processes.
right? Everyone knew Chadwick. He was an incredible actor. That was an offer.
Yeah.
We were very, very fortunate.
Unanimous decision.
Right,
One
unanimous.
Of the few
We all wanted him.
completely unanimous.
Right? And he said yes.
Yeah.
Right. So that was a critical part of it. It was somebody that everyone wanted,
Right.
who we all believed in, and he was also compelled to play the part.
Yep.
So I remember it was very easy. It was a phone call. I think he was in a car, if I remember correctly.
Switzerland.
Yeah. And was he at a film festival?
He was-
Film
or-
festival
yeah.
in Switzerland.
And it was
yeah.
a 10-minute call. It basically was, we would love for you to do this. And he responded, I would love to do it. And
Because we had
great,
all known enough
right?
of his work, and when you
Yep.
sort of put him through the process, even though those two roles were very, very different in their process, how we cast them, both
Yep.
Spider-Man and Black Panther, the similarity between these two roles was, and this was something that we were all sort of conscious of as we were moving through the process, was there was an enormous level of responsibility.
Huge
Yes.
Both
pressure,
of these roles.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, to be able to introduce a character like Black Panther,
Yeah.
who not only would be in Civil War, but hopefully go on to then head his entire sort of own franchise within the MCU, and to bring a new Spider-Man to audiences. I mean, those were like
Yeah.
enormous opportunities, but lots of expectations and lots of pressure.
Chadwick was emerging as a generational talent, so we all knew that he could more than carry that level of responsibility.
Right.
Talk about discovering a generational talent. This has to be one of the hardest pieces of casting you've ever worked on.
It is.
because of the pressure,
Yeah.
the history involved
and
with
the
the character
volume.
and the level of
Yes.
expectation.
Yeah, the history, and really the recent history. When I first even heard that we were doing another Spider-Man movie, my thought was, we just did one. I mean, I didn't cast it, I didn't do it. Someone else did a beautiful job, but we just had Andrew Garfield, we just had Tobey Maguire. So I think the expectations were very high. If we were going to do it again, what were we going to do? Why were we going to do it again? And we better do it well. Part of starting that process was, what haven't we seen? What is a little bit different here? And one of the things that I felt we hadn't truly seen was really a young person.
I had collected comics as a kid. One of my favorite comics was Spider-Man. What I loved about Spider-Man as a kid was that I could relate to him, that he felt like he wasn't much older than me, or that he was me. We all looked at the previous landscape of actors that had played the part and said, well, these are all 20-year-olds
Yep.
playing teenagers.
Yeah.
Can we find someone that is a teenager
Yeah.
that can bring the essence from the comics to the story?
Another point that's hard to even wrap our heads around now, but I think back, that we were casting these two actors, Black Panther and Spider-Man, and they were going to have essentially one big scene in the movie. So you had to make this decision, and I had to try to find the talent who were going to do this one scene and then go on to star in their own film.
That's right. They have to carry their own franchises.
Have to carry their own
against
franchises.
Downey and Evans.
And with Spider-Man, the other unique challenge is that we were looking for a young actor, and we all know they have growth spurts. And we were going to shoot this scene, and then I think sequentially the movie, which wasn't going to be shot for another year and a half, was supposed to be taking place a few weeks later. If this actor grew a foot
Right.
or half a foot. So really, we thought, okay, probably the youngest we can look for is 17, 18. We can't hit somebody right in the middle of their growth spurt. So we were looking at a very narrow window of ages.
Plus, if you're working with someone under 18, there's different
Yeah.
hours that are involved in shooting, and on movies of this scale and this complexity, those hours can become very difficult, especially when you're talking about the lead character.
Yep. And it was an exciting reveal that Spider-Man was going to be in this, and no one knew about it, so we couldn't exactly advertise. So we had to make up scenes to use as audition materials, and we also knew in this case we wanted to cover as much ground as possible. So this wasn't a case where we were going to get 2,000 submissions and see 200. We were going to get 2,000 and see 4,000.
Right.
Because you sometimes never know where you're going to find it.
So, I mean, you're looking for a generational talent. But
Yeah.
It's not like there's pre-existing work to identify them by. You're looking for a needle in a haystack. I can't remember, did Marcus McFeely just write sides for it?
The first thing we pulled was from Weird Science.
Oh,
That's right.
then-
Oh my God, I forgot that.
Yeah. And then as it went on, I think actually we were having trouble finding scenes, but yeah, I'm sure as we got further down, so then we would start with this huge playing field, and I'm looking at as many tapes as I can, and my team is looking at tapes, and we're going through the process, but then you start to pare it down, and then we're starting to look at our final group. And we had many auditions, and even Tom had many auditions before we got to the screen test process. And again, he was finding the character, and we were all finding the character. And I remember one moment where it all kind of clicked. He had come into my offices on Larchmont, and he had his sleeves kind of rolled up and his hat on, and I stopped and I said, I think we need to embrace your inner nerd right now. And
Awesome.
can you just sort of lose the cool factor? I know you have it.
Yeah.
We're not going to forget that. But for this moment, for this audition, and I think that's where he started to actually really key into the character. and
Unlocked
clicked
it.
into it. Altogether, he probably did 6 or 7 auditions,
Wow.
including the final 2, which were screen tests with Robert Downey Jr.
That's right.
and Chris Evans. And I would add to this that we went through the process, we saw total unknowns, kids who had never acted before in their lives
Yep.
who sent audition tapes, and some of them went very far. But as we really started to think more about what you're talking about, the level of responsibility, I'm also looking at what the background is of this person, okay? And I had seen Tom actually in The Impossible, and I was blown away by his work in that. Another facet of our work as casting directors is we have to get to know our actors really well. In that process, I found out he started dancing when he was 9 years old for Billy Elliot. He was training 8 hours a day. So that tells me right away, this is an actor who has a lot of discipline,
Right,
who
level
knows
of
what it's like to
commitment,
work
right.
hard, who knows what it's like to do 8 performances a week. And that kind of muscle and that kind of mindset and skill and endurance, I knew could actually serve him really well as a young person, having to walk onto a set and not only have a strenuous production schedule, but hold his own with all of these other actors.
This is a testament to our reliance on you. Because I remember we're in the middle of rewrites on Civil War. This was a giant, that was the biggest thing Marvel had done to that point. It was bigger than the Avengers, more characters, crazy. And we were in Atlanta and we were flying some of the finalists down to look at for Spider-Man. And I remember calling you before we went in the room and I just said, who do you think it is? And you said, listen, I don't want to weight it one way or the other, but I think you should pay attention to Tom Holland. And I remember he and I went in the room and everyone came in. And then Tom came in, and within like 30 seconds, we just saw the energy, we saw that boyishness, we saw the charm.
The
we saw
nerd.
the nerd, right? I remember he walked out, we called you and said, that's him. He's the
Yeah.
kid, you're right, he is absolutely. Then it was a process from there.
It's like, Marvel Studios was controlling the MCU, but Spider-Man was a character that Marvel Publishing had previously licensed to Sony Studios.
So it was a team effort.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we had to team up with Sony on this. They were going to be responsible for paying for the new Spider-Man movies.
Right.
We were borrowing the character for Civil War. We were intractable about our vision for what we wanted for Civil War.
Right.
And they wanted to go through a process of trying to define what was correct for them
Yep.
in their franchise.
Yeah, and this is, you're bringing up another interesting part. I said casting directors wear a lot of hats, and one of them is certainly diplomat. I think a lot of actors have the perception that we make the decisions.
Yeah.
We do not make the decisions. We hopefully can help inform them. By our instincts, by our discovery of talent. But ultimately, one of the hardest challenges we face is when people aren't on the same page.
Right.
It's the casting directors, it's the directors, it's the producers, and it's the studio. And there's a lot of different minds that have to meet in the middle. And of course, what I always want is the biggest win. I want everyone to feel excited. I want everyone to feel like it's the biggest win. But sometimes it really is listening and trying to understand and trying to meet everybody's needs and then being able to articulate why this is the person we want.
It was a fight, but it was worth the fight.
Yeah.
It's a fair fight to have.
Yes.
Because
Well, because the
there's
stakes
a
are
lot
so
at stake there. And we were defending our point of view for what we thought would work for our movie.
Yep.
And they needed to think through the larger process, but it all came from you.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. And now it seems like, in hindsight, of course he was the guy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But it's easy to forget.
Well,
and
when
with
you're
Downey,
going
the
through
same.
thousands
Well, of course with Downey the same, right?
Yeah,
like
like,
that
who
had to
else
be
could
the
be?
toughest conversation to roll the dice on him
Yeah.
for something so significant.
Yeah.
It could have gone one or two directions.
It could have
right?
gone. It could have gone a lot of different ways.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's a multiverse in which it went
Yeah.
very poorly.
Yes.
And then there's this universe where it was explosive
Yeah.
and historic. Talk about that for 2 seconds.
Okay.
The Robert process.
Okay.
Like, what was it that made you believe that it would end this way?
I think there have been certain situations where you think you have the right idea, but you need the proof. From talking to Jon Favreau from the very beginning and the kinds of qualities he wanted out of this Iron Man, Downey seemed like a good candidate, but he had some baggage.
He had just gotten out of jail.
Yeah, those factors made him not appear family friendly. And this was the first, Marvel production for Iron Man, and they wanted to make sure that everyone would come and feel good about it. In fact, I can now say this because I heard Kevin Feige just said it at the USC commencement, that at the beginning we offered it to Clive Owen. Clive said no.
And you couldn't get Robert approved by...
We couldn't get Robert approved by the higher
Right,
higher-ups, the corporate structure, the higher up that
check
there was
writers.
financing.
Right.
Yeah.
This had happened once before on a project I was on.
Right.
We had screen tests and there was an actor that they didn't want, and I said, what if he buys his own plane ticket and flies himself in, and he ended up getting that part. So we were sort of at a standstill because we knew he was good, he wasn't getting approved. I said, what if we just have screen tests and we test a bunch of people, and would they allow him to test? Because I really thought that if you could see it, it would be undeniable.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard with casting. You're trying to imagine, what is this person going to be like? With someone like Chadwick in Black Panther, I think all of us could imagine
Yep.
how he would play this character. But Downey also wasn't seen as an action hero. And he was in his mid to late 40s at the time, which at the time was a little bit risky. I think now we've all grown accustomed to that, but it wasn't the norm.
Right.
So that was the solve, was to hold screen tests. And as we hoped, it was just completely undeniable, really, within the first 30 seconds.
Usually is the first 30 seconds.
It is. It's that fast.
You have to feel like a sense of fate was working, or an
Yes.
instinct
Yes.
on everybody's part that was so strong, because where you did that screen test was just next to the stage near Paramount, where we shot Robert's last piece of footage as Iron Man, where he said, "I am Iron Man," before he died. So it was literally
Then 100 yards.
100 yards away from where he did the screen test, which is very, very strange. Yeah.
That journey is incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we adore him.
Yeah.
Let's talk a
Yeah.
little bit about what I think is probably maybe the best story in movie casting ever, right? Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Okay.
It's a script that was worked on for several years here at AGBO, and the Daniels wrote it for Jackie Chan.
Right.
The movie was scripted specifically for him. So we put them on a plane to go see Jackie, and he didn't get it. He didn't want the role, which is where the real journey, the real story for this movie began.
Yes.
And it wasn't like there was a lot of time spent thinking about other male leads that could play that role,
We did a list. We talked
Right.
about it for a minute.
Yeah.
right? But
And then
then
moved on.
creatively they said, let us rewrite this.
Yeah.
And just walk us through sort of how that cast came together.
Yeah. Even with Jackie Chan saying no, I've learned along the way that when an actor says no, you don't have to be sad, because it means they're not the right person to play
Right.
the part. It means they don't get it, they don't click with it, and that means their creativity isn't going to be firing.
You don't want to be trying to talk them into the movie the entire time they're making the movie with you.
Oh, if they don't see it, we're not going
Right.
to see it. If they're not really resonating and feeling passionate about bringing it to life, they're not the right person to to play it. So even though that was a loss, and I know everybody really wanted him, it opened up this whole new pathway. The Daniels went off for a while. They had to just go right and reconsider it and think, and it's the best thing that could ever happen. I mean, coming to Michelle Yeoh, so we knew we needed the physical skills, we needed the acting chops, also the comedy. And I don't think anyone had seen her do such a wild and powerful and poignant, but also funny character. So once they had the script written, I think that's where the conversation started with her. We also at the time had Awkwafina.
And she fell out because of a conflict, if
Yeah.
I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, so Michelle came on board, and that was a huge infusion. And then we lost Awkwafina.
Right.
And at the time, again, the industry can't be changing rapidly enough, and it is changing, but I think there was a question of, well, who else is there? You know, we needed a Chinese female comedic lead who was multifaceted and multi-talented. And of course, there were a lot of names to consider, but not thousands.
Right.
So that process was then, we're gonna find somebody great.
And also,
Don't worry.
I mention this too, because this is also an interesting aspect of what you do and what you sometimes what you have to think about. There's names, talented actors available.
Yes.
But are they also bankable to the financiers behind a movie?
Because this
Adds
wasn't,
a layer of complication.
it was not a cheap indie.
Yes.
It was an expensive indie.
If we know that they need a certain level of cast to secure the financing, then we feel responsible for delivering that or making a credible enough argument that we're going to find people to surround Michelle that are going to be so excited and undeniably great in their parts that the movie's going to work.
Let's talk about Ke Quan.
Yeah.
Where did the idea come from?
The idea came from multiple sources. And again, sometimes there's a little bit of magic that happens
Yeah.
in what we do. There's a lot of hard work, and sometimes there's that energy, and I feel like everything was coming together at the right moment. He had stopped acting, which he's talked about. He had stopped acting, he wasn't finding roles that were fulfilling, he got out of the business, and not long before we started the casting process for this film, he decided to get back into the business and signed with an agent. So we put out a casting call, a breakdown, and he was submitted. And he had the willingness and the desire to really stretch and try something different. But when he came into audition to our offices, he hadn't auditioned in like 30 years. So it was a mind-blowing situation. But he was great. He didn't need our help. And so from the very beginning, he had a really fantastic take on the character. But again, that's not the end of the story, because we saw a range of people. That part is crazy complicated for Michelle's character and his, and Stephanie Sue's character of Jobu, because they had to play two versions of themselves.
Right.
And we knew that Ke was bringing a Wayman that we would fall in love with, that embodied the kindness and the sensitivity and all the struggles, and that we would connect with him. We needed to see Alpha Wayman too. And so we saw some other actors that were instantly Alpha Wayman.
Right.
And had to find the other part of the character. Wow. And it came down to him and one other person. And actually, we did the test. I think you remember we did it here.
We did
at
here
AGBO.
at AGBO, right.
And Ke did an interview, and I read it, and I felt really bad, where he was talking about, we try not to have actors run into each other in the audition process. Sometimes it can just psych them out, and we do our best. But he had run into the other actor, who I won't name, but who's quite dashing and handsome and was impeccably dressed and just kind of exuded this confidence. And he talked about how he wanted to crumble. You know, how hard that was to pass him and think, that's the guy that's going to get the part.
Right. Talk about Jamie Lee Curtis for a second. I remember this was a tricky role.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's a very strange role in the movie.
Yeah.
Especially because I think early on the thought process was who could handle the physical sequences, you know? But I think we started moving past that to find more interesting casting.
Yeah.
As another one I remember, I think we had to give back some of our producing fee to get Jamie in the movie, if I remember correctly, right? That's why you keep, when you're working on an indie, your producing fee is basically just a little, it's like a checkbook.
To spend
And
later.
you just to spend later, and you just,
Give it away.
there you go, and here you go, and an extra day, there you go. But that was one of those, I think I remember, where, you know, we wrote a check to get her in the movie. I mean, it's an amazing actress, so.
Yeah, and because we were now casting unknowns, quote,
Right.
unknowns, now Oscar nominee, Stephanie Sue, Oscar winner, Ke Huy Quan.
Right.
At the time, unknowns, we thought this could be an opportunity to cast a more established actress, right, to help in that department. And we did audition some actresses for that part, and that was part of the incubating process, I think, for the Daniels to see different ways it could go, and that helped us move off of having somebody that was purely going to nail the physical aspects. We looked at comedians, we looked at other people, and they didn't necessarily respond to the part.
Yeah.
Again, showing us that they weren't the right people to play it. And then with Jamie Lee, it felt like we had that right idea, and also what was great is it was a completely different part for her to play, something that audiences hadn't seen her do. She was down. She wanted to fully bring that character to life.
Yeah, she really embraced it.
Again, in hindsight, everything looks different, but the Daniels were not well known. You identified their talent, and I know that's part of your mission to support emerging artists. You saw Swiss Army Man. You knew what they were doing with Everything Everywhere All at Once, but at the time when we were discussing it and casting it, that was the only real piece of work that people could look at, and Swiss Army Man was not accessible
for everybody. They were the guys
everybody.
that did the Farting Corpse movie.
Yeah,
That was it was a bit of a journey.
So when you're going to movie stars like Jamie Lee Curtis, it is a little bit of a get-to-know-you process.
You know, Everything Everywhere has these strong themes of existentialism and absurdism and nihilism. I mean, do you think about the larger tone or themes in the film also as you think about who may be right for these specific characters?
100%. And I think that I remember having a conversation with you after Stephanie Sue's callback, and that was like an hour and a half long. And she went all over the map. In my memory, she was doing it in French and standing on her head. That didn't actually happen, but it felt like that. So one of the things that we're really conscious of was their desire to have a freewheeling set where people feel uninhibited and they can try new things. So Stephanie's background in theater was invaluable. She was in SpongeBob on Broadway. She knows how to play. She knows how to create. And I think they wanted that atmosphere where everyone felt comfortable, they could be vulnerable, they could take risks, and they could be daring. And that involved actors who are like-minded, who have the same spirit. And also, I think there is a real feeling of camaraderie and family. Again, I spoke about the intangibles. These are not things that you can necessarily learn in casting, but you want to tune into on some level, because when you bring people together that share a passion and are coming from their heart and are willing to put it all out there, you feel it. And they created that atmosphere. You created it by bringing us all together. They created it day to day on the set. And I really think that's baked into the DNA of the film. I think it's a brilliant film. They did an incredible job, but I also think there is an element of real kindness and connection that as an audience you feel.
That's amazing. Yeah, very well said. And super. These are the intangibles that end up making or breaking an experience for people.
And a happy set, I learned from you, is everything.
It's everything. It's everything. Pizza and wine after work on Friday.
Yeah. I remember as we were sort of growing as filmmakers and sort of being exposed to more people, I remember that moment where we had this opportunity to work with very well-established actors and discovering the massive range of how they do what they do.
Yeah.
And sort of realizing, our job as directors is to sort of figure out how to bring the best performance out of each of these people, no matter what their process is. And it can be radically different. And there are some actors who we will can all agree are like among the greatest that we've seen, who are very almost opposite of what you're describing in terms of what was necessary in Everything Everywhere. They can be very mechanical, methodical, specific, rigid in the process, and they need, I do this, then you do that, I do this, then you do that, And again, it seems very restrictive, but at the same time, some actors are just brilliant in that kind of format and structure. And some aren't. Some are fall apart in that kind of a structure.
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating.
And you've had these massive, massive casts. Because we hope it feels like the same movie. Right? We hope it feels like everybody's inhabiting the same world and the ensemble is seamless.
Yeah,
that's true. This has been a fascinating conversation. We can't thank you enough. Before we wrap up, we have this little segment we call Small Bites.
Okay.
So basically, let's rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Just,
off the cuff.
Off the cuff, as
boy.
quick as you can. If there were one, movie or show or piece of
play,
piece of storytelling that you could watch again for the first time, just to have that feeling of watching it again for the first time, what would that be?
Philadelphia Story.
Oh, there you go. That's a great one.
Cool, yeah. So if you could work with anyone, dead or alive, who would that be?
Meryl Streep.
She's come up before, by the way.
Right, you're the second person to say Meryl
Okay.
Streep.
Yeah.
If you could give yourself one piece of advice, your younger self,
My younger self.
one piece of advice, what would that be?
Trust your instincts.
Awesome.
It's a great one.
What would you say is the most important quality of a casting director?
Curiosity.
All right. This is awesome.
By the way, you're the first person who's ever done it in lightning style.
Okay.
It turns into like a
took the
longer
challenge.
conversation. Last question. When, and you don't have to say who with, but when was the last time that you felt that electric current during a casting session?
Key.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for all of your incredible contributions to stories over the last 2 decades, and for all the amazing careers that you have either helped jumpstart or course correct, and the platform that you've given to so many diverse actors. It's really awe-inspiring, and we're very, very grateful to work with you.
I would say that of all our collaborators, and we've been so lucky to have so many wonderful, amazing collaborators, it's you, the volume of work you can do, but at the
Batting
highest
1,000.
No, at the highest level of inspiration and innovation is staggering. And I constantly marvel at it. So,
Thank you.
so
Thank
admire
you.
what your road has been.
I love what I do. It's a pleasure to get to talk to you about it. I'm really passionate about it, and it's fun.
Yeah.
So fun to watch these characters be born, right? It's the moment where they actually are born and take flight.
I think I cried at every single speech that Ke gave during that award season. I don't know if there's ever been anyone more deserving.
Yeah.
Or Suhail.
Yeah.
Or Suhail. Yeah, these are great. These are great stories, and I think such good inspiration for all the actors out there not to give up.
Yeah.
Not
absolutely.
to give up. Just
So
if
true.
you love it and you have to do it, please do it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, thank you
you.
again. I'm sure the viewers thank you.
Yeah.
Mangia bene, everybody. We'll see you next time on
Ciao.
Pizza Film School.
Oh, wow, yeah, man, it's Pizza Film School. About to learn about the movies, man. Whoa, it's real cool.